All right, Mr. Turk here to talk about impulse engine research. So, among many pieces of the puzzle that goes together to creating an impulse engine based space transportation architecture is incorporating engineering ideas from various people. One of the sources comes from Buzz Aldrin, the Apollo 11 astronaut who walked on the moon with Neil Armstrong. After he returned from his mission, he tried to figure out a way for people to travel between the Earth and Moon more economically. And it turns out no one was interested in what he figured out. So then he expanded his vision a bit and studied cyclar orbits linking planet Earth to planet Mars. A cyclar orbit is, well, first of all, the planets orbit the sun. The Earth is an almost circular orbit around the sun. Mars is in an elliptical orbit around the sun. A cyclar orbit would be an elliptical orbit that encounters Earth, and then later on, it encounters Mars. And if you can design it just right, then eventually it will repeat its encounters passing near Earth, passing near Mars. So the idea is you could put infrastructure, a space hotel, whatever it is, onto this cyclar orbit, and it would be a way of commuting, in a sense, between the two planets. So the idea that he figured out was taken up and studied by Jim Lagunsky over here and his graduate students and others over at Purdue University. And they ran a bunch of computer simulations and analysis. Here is their paper published in the Journal of Spacecraft and Rockets from 2006. As always, with these engineering papers, you really want to read the abstract and then decide if it's something that you want to get into. In this case, it is. So we're going to get into this. Now, understanding the paper, well, is going to take a bit of effort, but I'm going to try to guide you through the significant points of it, and that's what we would use in our research. So in this paper, they analyzed used computers modeling to explore different types of cyclar orbits, potentially linking Earth to Mars. What they found is that there are many, many of these, and they grouped them into families. This is a later paper from their first discoveries and analysis. And in this paper, they tried to kind of sort out the best ones to look at. And so, kind of like the highlight for what we would say here would be interesting to look at for us is the idea that they are ballistic cyclers. And a ballistic cycler is one that doesn't use a significant amount of rocket fuel in order to maintain that orbit. So the first problem with designing these orbits is that nothing is perfect out there. We're not in a perfectly circular orbit around the sun. The Mars has its own different inclination to the orbital plane from the Earth, and so just doing something that links the two planets together is not exactly trivial. But they go through this paper and the introduction, the explanation. Here is a nice fine diagram trying to explain what they worked out and what the nomenclature is here. So when we talk about a ballistic cycler, that means not using significant amount of rocket fuel. And S1L1 is referring to the fact that an object on this particular orbit would first have a short leg. That's what the S stands for, a short leg, and then followed by a long leg before it re-encounters, let's say, the Earth. Okay, now, kind of interesting. Another little side point here is that things tend to repeat on a period of 4 2/7 years. That's just if you want to deal with it as rough fractions, what does it take to link Earth and Mars with some sort of repeating orbit? So this diagram would be great if you understood it, but fortunately for you, there is a YouTube video that they put together to uh, illustrate this. And so we're going to skip through this whole paper, past all the great data and tables and references and everything that's going on, and let's take a look at the YouTube video that tries to explain this concept to you.
This is the S1L1 cycler, which repeats every 4 2/7 years. It uses multiple gravity assists of Earth in order to repeatedly encounter Earth and Mars without spending propellant. Our cycler vehicle, the Green Diamond, is boarded by the crew during its encounter at Earth. After 5 months, the first crew arrives at Mars. The cycler vehicle does not stop at Mars, so the crew takes a smaller taxi vehicle to the surface. The cycler vehicle then begins its trip back to the Earth to pick up the next crew to take to Mars.
Blue orbit is Earth, red orbit is Mars.
The cycler vehicle performs a gravity assist at the Earth, but does not pick the second crew up yet. Four and 2/7 years after launch, the cycler vehicle encounters Earth and picks up the second crew bound for Mars. The relative positions of the Earth and Mars are the same as at the initial Earth launch. The second crew is dropped off at Mars and joins the first crew. The cycler vehicle continues on its way back to Earth to pick up the third crew.
So right now it's on the long leg.
As before, an Earth gravity assist is required to ensure the cycler vehicle's next encounter with Earth will be at the right time.
Now it's on the short leg.
8 4/7 years after launch, the cycler vehicle arrives at Earth and the third crew comes aboard. The process starts over again to repeat itself indefinitely.
Okay, so that is the brilliant idea behind. Great. Do I know how to get out of here? No. Trying to get out of here is interesting. All right, that was a crude way of doing it, but I got out of there. I'm now going to go back to this paper, back to the beginning of it, and start over. So now hopefully you have a little bit better understanding of the terminology. What is a ballistic cycler? That is a spacecraft that is on a unique orbit that links Earth and Mars that tends to repeat itself indefinitely without using a significant amount of rocket fuel to maintain that arrangement. But it's not perfect. So there will be a need to expend some sort of rocket fuel just to maintain that arrangement. And a gravity assist is a situation where it's using the gravitational pull of a planet to change its orbit. And it's doing that specifically to maintain the relationship of cycling between Earth and Mars. Okay, so there's the terminology. Here's a fine, detailed engineering analysis about how to calculate what it takes to maintain these orbits. This graph shows the same thing that the YouTube video showed, that if I were to use if I were to use blue to represent the distance of the Earth from the sun, that would be that line. If I were to use red to represent the distance of Mars from the sun, that would be that line. And in the video, they used dashed lines. What you see here is if we had a cycler and it left Earth, then the reason they're designed the way they are, one aspect of designing them is to try to get from Earth to Mars in the least amount of time. It's always believed that we want people to be in space for the least amount of time as they travel between the planets. And so a taxi is a vehicle that has to slow down, depart this cycler vehicle, slow down on its own to land on Mars. And in the analysis that these guys do, the cycler would then be empty. It goes beyond the orbit of Mars, back to the orbit of Earth, does a gravitational encounter, and then does the short leg where it's actually in this one it goes out past Mars twice, then comes back, encounters the Earth, actually goes closer to the sun than the Earth's orbit for a little bit. Then its orbit changes, and then finally, way over here is the second time that the cycler can be reused to rapidly send a crew from Earth to Mars. So it can't be used every year. It can't be used every encounter with Mars. It can be used every 2 encounters with Mars. So if you want a crew to come back from Mars to Earth, you would use a cycler that's phased differently. And that would be, for example, shown here. You leave Mars and now you get to Earth rapidly. And then that cycler is not available for use until it goes and does its complete cycle and resets itself. So to make this thing work, you would need at least one outbound cycler to take people from Earth to Mars in a short amount of time, relatively. One inbound cycler to bring people from Mars to Earth in a relatively short amount of time. If you wanted to take advantage of the fact that Earth and Mars encounter each other, line up, synchronize every 26 months or so, then you would need 2 additional cyclers. So we're looking at 4 massive vehicles, each one a space hotel, maybe a space farm, to support crews as they travel between the planets. 2 ships, 2 cycler ships outbound from Earth to Mars, 2 separate cycler ships inbound from Mars to Earth. Now, I believe we should turn these ships into farms, not just hotels, and have a permanent crew on board maintaining the farms, or at least only swapping out as they encounter Earth, which they do twice as often as the crews use them to transit between Earth and Mars. All right, so here's all this great mathematical analysis, engineering description, da 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 da. Wait till you get to college and you study in depth. So there is something here I should mention, and that is a deep space maneuver, DSM. So that is the delta V that the cycler vehicle would need in order to tweak its orbit ever so slightly so that it will be on a repeating pattern of encountering Earth and Mars. And so here's getting to be the punchline. Let's see. What was table 1? Oh, table 1 was sort of like in the ideal situation. Nope, it's the types of characteristics that they used, ignoring the real details. So that was table 1. Tables 2, 3, 4, and 5 are the ones that we would embrace. Goes like this. So table 2 is the itinerary, the schedule for one cycler vehicle going out where the computer was tasked with minimizing the amount of delta V needed to maintain the cycler on its cycler orbit. Now let's see. Today is already June 29th, 2021. So what this says, if you wanted to ride this cycler vehicle from Earth to Mars, the next opportunity would be on May 25th, 2023. And the infinite velocity, which I will teach you later, would be 6.09 kilometers per second. Ideally, the cycler vehicle would dip to within 20,000 kilometers above the surface of the Earth so that the Earth would just change the direction of its orbit and the speed of its orbit by just the right amount. And then it would take, I think you read this as 887 days time of flight on this particular leg of its journey. Where does it go? Actually, that would only take you to Earth. And you would be returning to Earth on November 13th, 2024. So even this isn't good enough to use to get you to Mars. What you need is one of these little superscript A's here, and that is to choose an encounter with Earth outbound that would take you to Mars at some date that's in the future, not in the past. On this schedule, the next opportunity would be on June 1st, 2025. And at that time, the altitude of the cycler orbit whizzing past the Earth would be 16,100 kilometers to bend its orbit just right. And once you get on board that thing, it would take 200 days to travel from Earth to Mars. 200 days is a little over 6 months, and that is considered a favorable amount of time to travel between the two planets. It's not the absolute minimum as you look at any of the subscript A's, but this is what we would work with. Cycler Vehicle 2 is on a phased schedule that is different from this one. In fact, the encounter opportunity to go to Mars might come up a little bit earlier in the future. Yes, here it is. May 1st, 2023. So 2 years earlier, well, 2 years and 6 months usually earlier, is this opportunity to travel to Mars. And on this opportunity, it would take 223 days to travel from Earth to Mars. And then that cycler vehicle won't be ready to take another crew to Mars until June 14th, 2027. So table 1 is for one vehicle outbound to Mars. Table 2 is for a second vehicle outbound from Earth to Mars that is staggered behind it by one Mars cycle. Table 4 is for coming from Mars to Earth. So if you were on Mars today and you wanted to use this particular cycler to travel from Mars to Earth, your next opportunity would be on January 28th, 2023. And that trip would only take 121 days. Of course, just like there's two cyclers tables for going out to Mars, there are two cycler orbits for inbound from Mars to Earth. So looking it up in this table, we had an opportunity on December 6th of last year. The next opportunity won't be until March 11th, 2025. And if you were traveling from Mars to Earth on that day, yeah, then it would take you 146 days. I'm looking at this and I want to see. I did the crew transfer time from Mars to Earth. Yeah, A. And this one is inbound. So those are the tables that we care about 2, 3, 4, and 5. Table 6 and above is where they minimize both the delta V for the cycler vehicle as well as the delta V for the taxi vehicles to slow down or speed up to catch up to them from some sort of parking orbit around Earth or around Mars. And I propose that we ignore that we are attempting to incorporate impulse engine technology for the taxi vehicles. So instead of trying to minimize the system of cyclers and taxis, we will just minimize the cyclers and use tables 2, 3, 4, and 5 while we work separately on engaging and launching the taxis as the cyclers go by. I do not have the ability to tweak or challenge or modify any of the values published in this paper. I am accepting them as peer reviewed and good to use. I did model one of these encounters using STK and found that it was very challenging to model the encounter, just one of these encounters, in a way that reasonably connected it to the next planet. It would be, I believe, more time consuming than it's worth to build an STK scenario that follows one cycler through multiple encounters with the planets. Instead, we are just going to accept these values and use them for any calculations and analysis that we're going to do in the future. All right, so the rest of the paper, again, these tables are optimizing it for the taxi and the cycler, so we're not going to care. Here's some graphs showing what the effect is of traveling starting on different years. And overall, everything repeats on a 15-year cycle anyways. So you don't like, the dates in the table, advance it by approximately 15 years and use those dates. It's these graphs show there is a significant difference between the time of flight and how much time you can spend on Mars. It's sort of a trade-off. The longer it takes to travel between the planets, the longer the amount of time you can spend on the surface of the planet. That's what this left figure 9 part A is showing. All right. That is what I wanted to share with you today so that you have a beginning understanding of what a ballistic cycler is and why I would choose to want to use one to build a space transportation architecture linking Earth and Mars, kind of following the philosophy that Elon Musk used for SpaceX. This is a large architecture system, and it's as close to being fully reusable as we can design. And those are two desirable features that we're going to work with.